All right, so welcome back to another episode of Parker X. Again, we are featuring Brett Galvin, and the name of this series of podcasts is Deep Tech. Hopefully, you caught the first one, but if not, Brett and I are just going to explore different technologies and themes within the parking industry, and hopefully, you learn something in the process, and have a little fun doing it as well. So, what are we going to start with today?
Well, Lester, as always, welcome to the future. I'm calling you out of Australia, so we're always ahead. So today we're going to have a talk about planned and unplanned obsolescence and how to protect your investment over the long haul. So I think this is it's a key topic that a lot of asset owners face, and I think we can have a general discussion about strategies you can put in place and some of the headwinds that are around in the industry and areas that we think we might need to have a look at how we plan over that long haul.
You know what's interesting is that as being, having been on the reseller side where you're kind of, the value-added reseller where you're pulling together multiple technologies to create solutions for your clients, and then being on the manufacturer side as well. It was always one of the worst conversations you could have with your client. Obviously there was always everyone that saw it as a big revenue opportunity, but when you went to your client and you tried to convince them to upgrade their products, but there was really nothing to articulate as what it did different or better, it was always a really, really not fun conversation. But that being said, things do go out of style. Things do become obsolete, and you have to plan for their replacement.
The definition of a grudge sale or a grudge purchase is something you don't really want, but someone else is forcing you to do it.
Yeah.
And this industry, the parking industry, does sit sort of the second and third tier down, and it does get pushed around by the payment providers, the payment system gateways, the Microsofts, the Oracles of the world. When they choose to do things, it triggers repercussions down the line, and it affects the system. So when you're looking at that long view where you have a system that's 10 years of a life cycle, at some point, some of those off-the-shelf solutions that everyone is using will go out of favor and go out of support.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's out there that no one realizes, these manufacturers you're dealing with, they usually know all these dates.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They know the date of every product they have on their shelf that's going to go obsolete and when it's going to go obsolete. And if they don't know it, their accounting department certainly does when they're punching up the numbers at the end of the year to try to figure out what sort of inventory write-offs have to happen. So I think at a minimum, as a manufacturer, or you should be more transparent with what those dates are. And as an owner, you need to be asking those questions as well. Because, we all know what it's like when you're selling at the end of a model of a lineup when it's year 7 and you're, months away from a planned end of sale date on a product and it's in obsolescence by the time it goes live. I think your clients deserve to know that.
I think we can provide today some strategies around that. We can have some case study discussion about issues in the past. There is a difference between planned obsolescence and unplanned obsolescence. So we have a look at the experience of the industry at the moment. There are a range of new players. Some of those will shake out. Some of those will leave with their tail between their legs. Some of the established players will be disrupted in ways that will mean that they'll no longer be able to provide retrofitability of their existing platforms. So we need to also have a look at that as well. So unplanned and planned obsolescence. So two different things. And because you're operating, you're doing things, person who was in the chair who purchased the system, probably not in the chair 5-10 years down the road. It's a different arrangement there, and you may not check in all the time. And hopefully part of this series is we can give you a long view at some of the things that are coming down the chain, and we'll do that. We'll have a little segment later on PCI 4.0 and what that looks like. So that's due to be released at the end of this year, touted at the moment. So we'll have a look at that as well. So again, to start with, I think the industry is in an interesting point, and probably at a point where it hasn't been since the GFC, since the time where PCI was sort of first being released in 2006 onwards. So
it's interesting that
times.
You talk about
EMV.
the industry being pushed around a little bit by Microsoft and PCI and things like that. I mean, that's I guess I never really thought about it that way, and it's a very accurate description of what you end up experiencing. But that makes sense. Again, though, those dates are often broadcasted even by those folks as well, like the PCI 4.0.
Yeah,
like knowing that comes out at the end of the year, and then trying to figure out what that's going to mean for your revenue control system.
If you're running a business, that's multiple millions of dollars, you need to have a strategic view on it. Because those sort of disruptions, you don't want to be coming to them late. You'll be in a position where you have to do something quickly, which will cost you more. You potentially rely on good advice, listen to good podcasts about it, and be engaged with the industry, and you'll find out.
So let's talk about the planned obsolescence. So,
absolutely.
What do you do to protect yourself from that? I mean, I can think of some contractual language in your purchase agreements that should be there, but beyond
I think you've gone exactly there. Yeah. So let's talk about that. It's absolutely. So have a look at. Let's start with planned obsolescence. So what can you do? So I sketched out, I think, 7 things that I think covered it and cover this area, and I think let's have a quick chat about that. So I think when you're contracting now, and it goes to the industry shakeout side of it as well, contract now to actually have a different brand supplying you in the future. So have a think about what that means. So different talent, it's coming from a different location, potentially it gets written off quicker, so your investment goes somewhere else quicker. So contract now for a different brand in the chair. So have a look, and what that means is make sure you have options around defaulting, maintaining your rights to have a third party maintain your equipment. Make sure you're training your talent and identify talent who you might be able to onboard if it's critical to your system. So make sure you're owning your revenue stream, or you're protecting it by having people inside your own organization who at least can have access to or understand how to maintain that equipment if the equipment is not being responded to in the way that you need in your business.
So it's an interesting something you mentioned there was requiring in your contract with your suppliers that they allow for third-party companies to provide service and maintenance on your equipment. In my opinion, that's one of the most untapped areas within the parking industry. And as soon as customers get a little more savvy with it, and it happens on some larger scale, like at airports and things like that, you're going to see the likes of like Siemens and other companies start jumping into that space. Because it already happens with things like elevators and HVAC systems and escalators and all those major components in buildings.
Some of the ways that the value-added resellers actually maintain their businesses is working in other areas, using different talents and capabilities in other spaces, and parking just is one of the lines of businesses that they're in at that level. So that's quite interesting. But maintaining and training your people internally to try to do, you're going to know the bugs that come up within your system on an ongoing basis. Think about a remote airport that's 2 hours away from someone and doesn't have anyone in their city who can really support them. They train up as part of the program. They get certified on the equipment. So always have the avenue to get someone trained within your networks to a level of being a technician on the system.
That kind of goes into your purchasing choices as well, because not all the products are really designed in a manner that allows you to self-service.
Correct.
And some of these systems out there require, years of training and experience before you can start putting your hands in it, and you don't end up doing more damage than you potentially good to your product.
I don't disagree. And identifying talent from the supply side business that may have migrated away, may have fallen over, and onboarding that talent, it's an interesting strategy. But
So
fundamentally, from a contract level, make sure you have the right to maintain your equipment. If you're getting a service default or a change of the business or a change of the brand, make sure your rights are protected there. You have the ability for recourse, and that recourse may include the ability from the new brand to completely upgrade and replace the system that you have to a supported edition. So looking at some really strong sort of language that over that course might be interesting and might work for you.
You know what I think what I've seen in contracts before, but very, very seldomly, is the requirement that once the system is accepted, that you as the manufacturer are required to support the product that's in the ground for a minimum of 7 years, if not 10 in some cases.
Yep.
So you have to provide spare parts, etc.
In some jurisdictions, that's legislated. Just you need to provide that, so it's a part of doing business. But spinning that around, there's also the value of a service agreement and an ongoing contract when you buy your upfront service. So you're buying your equipment, you need to think about how that equipment's going to be supported over the long term. And writing that down, having a contract that's on your terms, not necessarily just a boilerplate that the vendor provides you, makes a lot of sense and really starts to make more sense to you if you look beyond just the short-term dollars and cents of keeping the system up, but what could happen if that system then falls over and is unable to be supported. So really interesting way. Over. Yeah, have a look at a 3M, have a look, it doesn't need to fall over fundamentally, but it could, as I said, the brand could simply change. So Worldline bought out Ingenico recently. Ingenico is the brand of terminals that a lot of vendors use to take their credit card transactions on. So they'll have a different theory, a different support, a different approach, a different investment in their R&D on that platform, which fundamentally might differ from what was anticipated and expected when you first bought that system. So certainly have a written service agreement down. Yeah. Written service agreement down, even if it's a $0 agreement, but an agreement that makes sense about how you're engaging with these solutions long term.
Requiring your vendors to notify you of planned obsolescence.
Absolutely, and penalties for not doing that.
Yeah.
One other area is maintaining a strong data archive as well. So making sure that if a catastrophic event happens one way or the other, you have that data offsite. You have those configurations written down. So imagine you're integrating to your BI tool. The talent that established that inside the vendor organization has moved on, and the team inside your own organization has moved on, making sure you're documenting how that is crafted. So if you find yourself in a position where you need to move away or do something else or have someone else take over the maintenance of that, making sure you're writing it down.
I think it's a pretty big fail if you're still trying to store your database on site or manage your database locally at a facility these days, with all the options to do, data warehousing, etc. If that's still your plan, is that I'm gonna place my SQL Server database that manages my entire facility, or the database that and software running my facility is still going to be, on a server that the vendor sold me in the electrical closet on P3, or under the parking manager's desk, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense to do it that way anymore. But you're right. If you don't have a plan for your data, and if you're dealing with your data locally, then that's something you definitely have to look after.
Yeah, and
in the how long the retention period is as well.
Oh, absolutely. The data itself, correct, and a lot of companies will find themselves in a position where just that's where they're in right now. So at least go back and have a look at how you're doing that. Have a discussion on what you can do to protect your data, protect the data of the people that are working with it, and also essentially the configurations with the third-party components as well, third-party consistence that you've established. They were probably a custom development at some point, or may have been, and so making sure you're maintaining that documentation. So if you need to move away, you move away in the right way.
So that kind of covers planned obsolescence, and we kind of started touching on what do you do if something else happens. I feel like we touched on a few points that related to unplanned obsolescence there, like make sure you're maintaining your data and all those things. But what other things are related to unplanned obsolescence can we do to mitigate that threat?
I think identifying a source of support for parts and components outside of your business is interesting. That continues on. There is a market in the secondary industry, and Lester, you and I know a few brands, a few businesses who specialize in keeping things alive that historically have been out of support.
So contractually, can you require the vendor you're working with to share that IP should they find themselves in that position, or escrow that IP in a way that allows others to support you?
I think that's a great way to start. At some level, every agreement should start with the ability to somehow access the source code. Obviously, it's never a great position to find yourself in where you have that as a scenario, but you need at least to have access to that.
Well, that's never where you want to end up, obviously.
No, and you never plan to be that way, for sure. Other than that, yeah, secondary industry components, secondary industry vendors who can potentially work with that market and start a marketplace of their own supporting those legacy brands are interesting. We've seen plays where source codes have been bought out and how that can work and not work. It's interesting. It's fundamentally about migrating to a supported platform in some way, shape or form over a medium term. Unplanned obsolescence is tricky because it's always it'll blindside you. So I think we've sort of spoken of the protections that you can put in place.
I think it makes perfect sense what you talked about. Just having protecting your data, make sure you know what your data retention is, make sure you know where it's at, and that you have access to it, and then having some contractual language that just allows for the sharing of that intellectual property associated with the products you have with third-party, the secondary repair companies, as well as the source code if necessary. And I've seen that requirement before where you have to escrow the source code, but I've never seen it related to the actual hardware before.
Escrow the source code, I've also seen at the punitive level, if you're not getting the service you want, you have the right at the cost of the vendor or at the cost of the supplier to replace the equipment. And that, you could easily see how that could turn into if this service isn't supported any longer, past its legislated, within its legislated term, then we have a recourse there to get access to it. So an interesting protection. It's an interesting time in the industry, I think, for that, and a way to consider that. And it done right, wrapped inside a service agreement, it can give you predictability and as well as risk management. So predictability of how much you're spending for.
It's those two things that you said that kind of drag this industry around a bit, or Microsoft Windows, and all the Microsoft products as well as PCI tend to kind of be lead on a lot of those things. I do think it can be planned a lot better, obviously, but they do seem to initiate a lot of change in our industry.
They do. And look, it's not just one database product or another database product. No. Oracle are also going through the same things now. Cloud solutions, there's some of the solutions and models that are in the cloud now are even being obsoleted. So it's an interesting form there. So these shifts don't go away. It's how you protect yourself and do it smartly too.
I think the difference that I've seen change over the last few years is that a lot of these updates are actually being initiated by the owners and operators more than they are by your local, parks vendor showing up or your vendor showing up for whatever you're utilizing going, hey, it's time to upgrade. Now you're getting mandated down from it flows down from the banks through the PCI kind of area, going, hey, Windows is going obsolete. They're no longer going to provide security patches. We have to make sure those patches are getting put in place so that we can continue collecting credit cards and all those things.
In terms of, then that's the way it should be. You know, you really should understand your business well enough to know what's coming down the stream. It shouldn't be up to your suppliers can say, hey, this is it, but you really should be guiding your own ship. A supplier will tell you potentially whether something will apply to you or not, but you should know. You should have those conversations with the relevant parties and really understand the tech. Otherwise, you're theoretically spending money in an area you don't need to. Not all changes apply all the time.
Yeah.
Not all changes have an absolute fixed point as well.
Yeah, I think it's tough because a lot of the people that are, really good at parking management, they may not necessarily be techie types, but, they can manage a facility and maximize revenue and reduce slippage and, really do a good job for the client without necessarily understanding that other part of it. So I don't know. I think it's more of a collaboration. I think your vendors owe it to you to give you some sort of insight on what they think is coming, because chances are they already know.
They should. They absolutely should know, and they should have a path for you. Fundamentally, let's go through those key points again. So making sure that you're contracting with your supplier and suppliers as a field, not only at the upfront purchase, but as a service contract along the term. Pay for good service, but pay for the risk of obsolescence as well. So make sure you have some clauses in there around how you can access your data, how you can access support, or how you can move to a platform where the system should be supported over its life, and it turns out that you're not being supported.
So let's make sure we post a link somewhere on the episode details that actually gives you just a couple of examples of language you could use in your contract writing, so that how to help you along in that direction.
Yeah, good one. Hey, Lester, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.